The ocean surface was calm, stretching out for miles like a sheet of dark glass under the night sky. Deep out in the North Atlantic, a massive United States Navy carrier strike group was cutting through the black water. It was a terrifying display of power. At the center was the aircraft carrier, a floating city carrying dozens of fighter jets and thousands of sailors. Surrounding it was a ring of steel, destroyers, cruisers, and frigates, all moving in perfect formation. High above, aircraft circled like hawks, scanning the water for any sign of danger. Below the surface, powerful sonar systems sent pulses of sound deep into the ocean, searching for the metallic echo of an enemy submarine. Inside the command centers of these American ships, the mood was confident. They believed they were untouchable. They had the best technology in the world. Their radar could see for hundreds of miles, and their sonar created a protective net beneath the hulls that nothing could slip through. In the briefing rooms, the commanders felt secure. They believed that no Russian submarine, no diesel boat, and certainly nothing else could get close to them without setting off alarms. They trusted their screens, and their screens were clean. There were no flashing red lights, no warning pings, just the empty silence of the deep ocean. But they were wrong. The silence was a lie. Suddenly, a message appeared on the secure command circuit. It wasn't a warning from their own sensors. It was a text message from a stranger. It read simply, "Congratulations, you are dead." Panic and confusion rippled through the command center. There had been no alarms, no explosions, no frantic calls from the sonar operators. But the message was real. It came from a Royal Navy submarine, the HMS Astute. The British boat had surfaced slowly, right in the middle of the carrier's protected zone. It had been there for hours. It had followed them, tracked them, and locked its simulated weapons onto the carrier. The British captain had taken photos of the American ship through his periscope, proving that he could have sunk the most powerful vessel on Earth before anyone even knew he was there. The American commanders looked at the water in disbelief. Somewhere beneath that cold surface, the HMS Astute had been watching them the entire time, silent, patient, and completely invisible. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the beginning. The story of the HMS Astute is not just about machine. It is about a desperate need to survive. In the late 1990s, the British Royal Navy was facing a crisis. Their fleet of submarines was getting smaller, and their budget was shrinking. People in the government and the media were starting to ask hard questions. They wondered if Britain could still compete with the superpowers like America and Russia. The Americans and Russians were pouring billions of dollars into new technology, building faster and deeper diving submarines. Britain didn't have that kind of money. They knew they couldn't build the most submarines, so they decided to do something different. They decided to build the smartest one. The engineers at the Ministry of Defense faced a harsh reality. If they fell behind now, they would never catch up. They designed the Astute class with a very specific purpose. It wasn't just built to carry nuclear missiles and hide in the deep like the older Vanguard submarines. This boat was a hunter-killer. Its job was to stalk the biggest prey in the ocean, aircraft carriers and enemy submarines. But to do that, it had to be more than just quiet. It had to be a ghost. From the very first drawing, the design philosophy was ruthless. The goal was absolute silence. In the underwater world, noise is death. If you make a sound, you die. So, the engineers looked at every single part of the submarine. If a part vibrated, hummed, or rattled, it was removed or redesigned. They looked at the nuclear reactor, the beating heart of the ship. In most submarines, the reactor creates a lot of vibration. On the Astute, they placed a massive reactor on special isolation mounts. Think of them like giant, high-tech shock absorbers that stop the vibration from traveling into the metal hull of the ship. They didn't stop there. They looked at the propeller. On a normal ship, the spinning blades create tiny bubbles in the water. When these bubbles pop, they make a noise that sonar can hear from miles away. This is called cavitation. The engineers gave the Astute a propulsor, a specially shaped system with blades that slice through the water so smoothly that the bubbles never formed. They even mounted the floors of machinery on rafts inside the submarine. So if a sailor dropped a wrench, the sound wouldn't ring out into the ocean. Perhaps the most impressive change was the fuel. Older submarines had to be cut open halfway through their lives to be refueled with new nuclear rods. This was loud, expensive, and risky. The Astute was designed to run for its entire life, 25 years or more, without ever needing a refill. This meant the submarine could stay sealed, keeping its design secrets hidden and its hull perfect. The result of all this work was remarkable. When they first put the Astute in the water for testing, it was so quiet that the British acoustic teams couldn't find it. They were using their best sonar to look for their own boat, and they kept losing it. The commanders smiled. They knew they had built something special. But building it was one thing, proving it was another. The proof came years later, during massive training exercises with the United States Navy in the Atlantic Ocean. These were not small drills. These were war games, designed to test the limits of the world's best navies. The Americans brought their carrier strike groups, the crown jewels of their defense. To the Americans, these groups were impenetrable fortresses. They had Aegis cruisers with radars that could see into space. They had destroyers sweeping the ocean with active sonar, which sends out loud pings to bounce off enemy hulls. They had helicopters dipping listening devices into the water, and airplanes dropping sonar buoys. Above the water, it looked like nothing could survive. Below the water, the HMS Astute was waiting. The British orders were simple: find the carrier, track it, get close enough to shoot. Don't get caught. Inside the British submarine, the crew went to work. The sonar room was dark and silent. The operator stared at screens that showed the sounds of the ocean as jagged green lines. The ocean is never truly quiet. It is full of noise. There is a hissing sound of merchant ships traveling in shipping lanes. There are the calls of whales echoing from the deep. There is the noise of waves crashing on the surface. To a normal person, it sounds like chaos. To the crew of the Astute, it sounded like cover. Instead of charging forward like a bull, the British captain used the classic Royal Navy tactic: patience. He didn't try to outrun the American ships. He let them come to him. He used the ocean against them. The submarine slid into what are called acoustic shadows. Sound travels through water and waves, but those waves can be bent or blocked. When the water temperature changes at different depths, it creates layers. These layers act like mirrors, bouncing sonar sound away. The Astute hid beneath these layers, invisible to destroyers searching above. The captain did something even bolder. He maneuvered the submarine into the wake of the American ships. When a massive ship moves through the ocean, it churns up the water, creating a trail of turbulence. This disturbed water confused the sonar. The Astute slipped into this turbulence, riding in the blind spot of the enemy escorts. The submarine moved at a crawl. The crew barely spoke. They walked softly in their socks. They didn't slam doors. They didn't drop forks in the galley. Every single person on board knew that one mistake could give them away. Hours passed. The American destroyers kept scanning, but their screens remained empty. They were looking for something that acted like a submarine, something moving fast, something trying to run away. They weren't looking for a hole in the water. They weren't looking for something that moved as silently as a drifting log. The Astute slipped past the outer ring of destroyers. It moved past the cruisers. It got inside the defensive circle. Suddenly, the British captain was looking at the hull of the American aircraft carrier through his sensors. He was close. Too close. He could hear the screws of the carrier churning the water. He ordered his weapons officer to plot a firing solution. In a real war, he would have fired heavy torpedoes that would have broken the carrier's keel and sent it to the bottom. In the exercise, he simply pushed a button that recorded the kill. The British crew had won before the Americans even realized the game was over. That was when the message was sent. Congratulations, target destroyed. The shock among the American commanders was absolute. In war games, it is expected that some ships might be hit. But usually, the submarine is detected eventually. Usually there is a chase. This was different. The Americans had been completely blind. They reviewed the tapes. They looked at their sonar records. They realized that the Astute had been there the whole time. It hadn't just gotten lucky once. It had positioned itself in lethal firing range multiple times. It had walked right through the front door of the world's strongest defense. The problem, they realized, was their own mindset. The American Navy had spent decades preparing to fight the Soviet Union. Soviet submarines were dangerous, but they were often loud. They were fast and aggressive. The Americans had built their whole strategy around hearing a loud enemy coming from a long way away. They relied on active sonar, loud pings, to find metal in the water. But the Astute didn't fit that profile. It didn't sprint. It didn't transmit radio signals. It didn't act like prey. It acted like a predator. The British doctrine was different. They trained their captains to think about alignment. They didn't chase the target. They aligned themselves with the target's path. They positioned themselves in the blind spots, the acoustic shadows where sound vanished. They used the background noise of the weather and the waves to mask their own tiny signature. The Americans realized that their technology had made them complacent. They believed that distance meant safety. They thought that if they couldn't see anything on their screens for 20 miles, nothing was there. The Astute proved that silence could make distance irrelevant. You could be safe at 20 miles, or you could be dead at 2,000 yards, and your screen would look exactly the same. Within the naval community, the whispers began. Sailors talked about how the British boat slipped into the shadows like smoke. They said, by the time we knew the fight had started, it was already over. The Royal Navy, true to their nature, didn't brag. They released polite statements about successful training. But behind closed doors, the Americans were scrambling. They had to change everything. They rewrote the book on how to protect an aircraft carrier. They started using helicopters differently, dipping their sonar buoys closer to the ships. They focused more on passive listening, just listening for the faintest whisper rather than blasting active sonar pings. They realized they needed to train their operators to look for the absence of noise, not just the presence of it. The Astute had forced the largest navy in the world to evolve. The psychological impact was just as heavy as the tactical one. For a long time, American sailors believed that their carrier groups were invincible. A carrier is a symbol of total dominance. It projects power anywhere in the world. The Astute cracked that illusion. It proved that even the biggest giant has a soft spot. It proved that mass firepower doesn't matter if you can't see what you are shooting at. The lesson that the British submariners had learned long ago was now clear to everyone. The future of war at sea belonged to the unheard. The British culture was brutally minimalist. They didn't use speed unless they had to. They didn't send messages unless it was critical. Every second of patience was a weapon. The Astute wasn't powerful because it had the most missiles. It was powerful because it had the most discipline. Among the younger crews, a saying began to circulate. The quietest ship doesn't hunt. It waits for the ocean to bring the prey to it. This became the new reality. The Astute wasn't just a submarine anymore. It was a symbol. It was proof that you didn't need to be the biggest to be the deadliest. As the years went on, the Americans adapted. In future exercises, they didn't just look for generic enemies. They programmed their computers to look for the specific, ghostly profile of the Astute class. They warned their escort commanders. Assume the contact is already inside your screen. This was a huge shift. Before, they assumed the water was clear until proven otherwise. Now, they had to assume they were already being stalked. They fought from a position of paranoia, which made them sharper and harder to beat. But even with these changes, the Astute continued to perform. In later drills, the submarine remained undetected for 30 hours straight while operating right in the middle of a hunting pack of destroyers. The American sonar operators would stare at their screens until their eyes burned, seeing nothing but the flat line of the ocean floor. The most terrifying part for them wasn't being sunk in the simulation. It was the emptiness. It was a feeling of knowing something was there, watching you, breathing the same air as you, but being unable to prove it. For the last decade, a war has been raging. It is not fought with missiles or bullets, but with propaganda, spec sheets, and internet arguments. On one side stands the undisputed king of the skies, the American F-22 Raptor. It is a machine so advanced that the United States Congress banned it from ever being sold to another country. It is the gold standard of stealth, a ghost designed to dominate the air before the enemy even knows a war has started. On the other side stands a challenger, the Russian Su-57 Felon. Moscow calls it a fifth-generation fighter. They claim it is faster, more agile, and deadlier than anything the West has ever produced. They claim it eats Raptors for breakfast. But claims are easy to make when you are fighting on paper. In the real world, physics does not care about propaganda. In the real world, engineering flaws cannot be hidden by a cool promotional video. Today, we are going to strip away the myths. We are going to look at the classified data, the engineering blueprints, and the real-world combat records from Syria and Ukraine. We are going to simulate a fight between these two titans, not based on a video game, but based on cold, hard military facts. If the F-22 Raptor and the Su-57 Felon met in the sky tomorrow, who would actually survive? To understand who wins, you first have to understand what these two machines were built to do, because they were built for two completely different wars. The F-22 Raptor was born from the Cold War. The Americans wanted a plane that was completely unfair. They didn't want a dogfighter. They wanted a sniper. The entire design philosophy of the F-22 is first look, first shot, first kill. The idea is simple. If I can see you from 100 miles away and you cannot see me at all, you are dead before you can even turn your radar on. This is why the F-22 looks so smooth. Every curve, every edge, every inch of skin is designed to scatter radar waves. It carries all its missiles inside its belly to keep its shape perfectly stealthy. The Russians, however, have a different philosophy. The Su-57 Felon is not a sniper. It is a brawler. Russian military doctrine assumes that eventually stealth will fail. They believe that eventually the two planes will get close to each other. And if they get close, the Russians want to be the best dancers in the sky. The Su-57 is designed for extreme maneuverability. It is built to twist, turn, and drift in ways that defy the laws of aerodynamics. It carries terrifying firepower and powerful radars. But in their quest to make it agile, the Russians made a fatal mistake. They forgot that in modern war, if you are seen, you are dead. Let's talk about the biggest controversy: stealth. This is where the battle is usually decided. The F-22 Raptor is widely considered the stealthiest fighter jet ever put into mass production. Its radar cross-section, or RCS, is estimated to be 0.0001 square meters. To an enemy radar, an F-22 looks like a marble or a bumblebee. It is effectively invisible until it is right on top of you. Achieving this required billions of dollars and exotic materials that absorb radar waves. Now look at the Su-57. Russia calls it a stealth fighter, but Western analysts call it a low observable fighter. There is a huge difference. The Su-57 has a reported radar cross-section of about 0.5 square meters. That is 5,000 times bigger than the F-22. To an enemy radar, the Su-57 doesn't look like a marble. It looks like a clean F-18 Super Hornet. Why is it so visible? The problem is in the design. If you look closely at the Su-57 engines, you will see round intake tunnels. This is a disaster for stealth because radar waves can fly right down the throat of the engine, bounce off the spinning turbine blades, and reflect back to the enemy, screaming, "Here I am." The F-22 uses S-shaped ducts to hide its engines. The Su-57 does not. Furthermore, the Su-57 has visible panel gaps, round infrared sensors, and rivets that reflect radar. It is a stealthy plane compared to old jets, but compared to the Raptor, it is glowing in the dark. But the Su-57 fanboys will scream. What about maneuverability? The Su-57 has 3D thrust vectoring. And they are right. This is a Russian jet's superpower. Thrust vectoring means a pilot can point the engine nozzles in different directions to push the plane. The F-22 has 2D thrust vectoring. Its nozzles move up and down. This allows the Raptor to make incredibly tight turns. But the Su-57 has 3D vectoring. Its nozzles can move up, down, left, right, and even independently of each other. This allows the Su-57 to perform the famous Cobra maneuver, where the plane stands vertically in the air, practically stopping and then drops the nose to shoot. It looks incredible at air shows. It draws huge crowds. But here's the brutal truth. The Cobra maneuver is a suicide trick in a real fight. When a plane pulls a Cobra, it loses all its energy and speed. It becomes a sitting duck floating in the sky. If you miss your shot while doing a Cobra, you have no speed left to run away. The F-22 pilot would simply fly around you and shoot you while you're trying to recover. In modern air combat, energy is life. The Su-57 spends its energy for show. The F-22 conserves its energy for the kill. Let's move away from the blueprints and look at the real world. How are these jets actually used? This tells us what their commanders really think of them. The F-22 Raptor has been combat tested in Syria. It didn't shoot down planes, but it dominated the airspace. There were reports of F-22s flying deep into Syrian airspace, sneaking up on advanced Russian Su-35s. The American pilots would fly right next to the Russian jets, unseen, and then radio them to say, "You should go home." The Russian pilots would panic, realizing a ghost had been sitting on their wing the whole time. This proves the F-22 stealth works in the real world against real Russian radars. Now look at the Su-57 in Ukraine. Russia is currently fighting a major war against a country with strong air defenses. If the Su-57 is truly a fifth-generation stealth fighter, it should be flying over Kiev, destroying targets with impunity. But it isn't. Intelligence reports show that Russia is using the Su-57, but they are terrified of losing one. They keep the Su-57s far behind the Russian border, firing long-range missiles into Ukraine from the safety of their own airspace. They do not dare to cross the front lines. Why? Because Russia knows the truth. They know the Su-57 stealth is flawed. They know that an old S-300 missile battery could probably lock onto it. If a Su-57 were shot down over Ukraine, the myth of Russian superiority would be destroyed forever. Their tactics reveal their lack of confidence. So, what happens if they actually fight? Let's simulate the engagement. The scenario is neutral airspace over the Pacific Ocean. One F-22 Raptor versus one Su-57 Felon. The engagement begins beyond visual range, or BVR. This is where 99% of modern air battles are decided. The two jets are 100 miles apart, flying toward each other at supersonic speeds. The F-22s and APG-77 radar, the most advanced in the world, scans the sky. Because the Su-57 has a larger radar cross-section, the F-22 sees it first. The American pilot gets a solid lock at about 100 miles out. The Russian pilot sees nothing. His radar screen is empty. He might suspect something is out there, but he can't see the ghost. The F-22 launches 2 120D AMRAAM missiles. These missiles fly at Mach 4. The F-22 doesn't need to keep pointing at the target. The missiles have their own radar. The Raptor turns around and leaves the area. Inside the Su-57, the pilot is flying blind until his warning systems start screaming. He has seconds to react. The missiles are coming in at 4,000 miles per hour. He activates his jamming systems. He deploys flares and chaff. He pulls his 3D thrust vectoring hard, throwing the jet into a violent spin to dodge. Maybe, just maybe, his incredible agility saved him from the first missile. But the second one is right behind it. The Su-57 is destroyed before the pilot ever saw the enemy. This is the reality of the F-22. It is boring. It is clinical. It is unfair. But let's entertain the Russian fantasy. Let's assume the F-22 misses. Let's assume the F-22 has run out of missiles, and the two jets merge for a dogfight within visual range. Now the Su-57 has a chance. This is the environment it was built for. The Russian pilot has a helmet-mounted sight. He just has to look at the F-22 to lock a heat-seeking missile onto it. The Su-57 uses its 3D thrust vectoring to turn incredibly tight, but the F-22 is no slouch. The Raptor has the highest power-to-weight ratio of any fighter jet. It can climb vertically faster than anything else. While the Su-57 is twisting and bleeding energy, the F-22 can use its raw power to go vertical, gain altitude, and drop down on a slow-moving Russian jet. Even in a dogfight, the F-22's ability to sustain energy gives it an edge. The Su-57 might be the better dancer, but the F-22 is the stronger athlete. There is one final factor: Numbers. Quality has a quality all its own, but quantity matters too. The United States built 195 F-22 Raptors. They are fully operational, fully integrated, and the pilots have decades of training on stealth tactics. Russia has struggled to build even a dozen serial production Su-57s. Their manufacturing is plagued by sanctions and delays. In a war, you fight with what you have. America has fleets of Raptors. Russia has a handful of prototypes masquerading as a fleet. The verdict is clear. The Su-57 Felon is an impressive piece of engineering. It is beautiful, it is fast, and it is incredibly agile. If this were 1980, it would be the king of the world. But in the era of stealth, it is a dinosaur. It is a fourth-generation fighter dressed up in a fifth-generation costume. It compromises stealth and maneuverability in an age where maneuverability doesn't matter if you are already dead. The F-22 Raptor remains the apex predator. It does not compromise. It does not show off at air shows with backflips. It simply dominates the electromagnetic spectrum. Until Russia can build a plane that can actually hide from radar, the sky belongs to the Raptor. What do you think? Is the Russian agility enough to survive the American sniper? Or is the Su-57 just a paper tiger? Let us know in the comments below. And make sure you subscribe, because in the next video, we are going to look at the only plane that might actually stand a chance against the U.S. Navy, China's J-20 Mighty Dragon. You do not want to miss that.